All of you, thank you for being here. I'm Margaret Mueller. I'm the president and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. We're going to give everyone just a minute or two to sign on. I see we have a bunch of people looking in. So while we do, please enjoy this message from our presenting sponsor, Kearney. Many thanks to Kearney for being our presenting sponsor for today's program, as well as our gold sponsor, BMO Harris, our silver sponsor, William Blair, and our promotional partners over at Packed with Purpose. Thank you all so very much. So quickly, for those of you who have not joined us before, we're using GoToWebinar. If you hover your mouse on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a paper icon, which gives you access to today's agenda. And then additionally, the question mark icon is where you can submit questions to Michael and Karen. I know that they're going to try to get to as many as they can. And for our members, we're hosting a virtual members only post-program discussion at 1 o'clock. It's over on Zoom. So all members who registered, you should have received a calendar invite to join. If you didn't, just email membership@executivesclub.org. They'll get it over to you, and we hope to see you on the other side for that discussion. And so to introduce our speakers today is Brent Ross from Kearney. Brent, over to you.
Thank you, Margaret. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brent Ross, a partner at Kearney. I'm a co-founder of our Design to Value lab that we call Pearl over in the West Loop, and I'm also the social impact lead for our Chicago office. And I'm happy to serve as co-chair of the Executives Club Innovation and Entrepreneurship Forum. It's great to be with you today on Earth Day. And my Kearney partners and I are proud to sponsor this event for the Executives Club of Chicago. We are the first carbon neutral consulting firm, and we're passionate about mitigating climate change and reducing emissions. Today, I'm very excited that we'll get to hear from both Michael Greenstone and Karen Weigert, two leaders working to affect change in how businesses view their relationship to the earth and climate. Michael Greenstone currently serves as the University of Chicago's Milton Friedman Distinguished Service Professor in Economics, where he also runs the Energy Policy Institution. And previously, Michael served as a member of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, where he co-led the development of the United States government's perspective on the social cost of carbon. Moderating today's conversation is Karen Weigert, former Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Chicago and current Executive Vice President for Slipstream. Slipstream is an organization focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy programs that move us farther and faster toward a clean energy economy. So just a quick reminder to send questions to Michael using the question mark icon on your browser. And we're very happy to have you here with us today. So with that, Michael and Karen, over to you.
Thanks very much.
It's a pleasure to join everybody. So thank you all. Happy lunch. Michael, it's super to see you again.
Wonderful to see you, Karen, and on Earth Day, no less.
I know. It's a fabulous day to have this conversation, and always a good day to have this many people jump in on something as important as the topic we're going to dig in on today. But Michael, I'd love to build a little bit from your background. As we just learned, you're an economist, and we're here talking about climate change. Can you help us connect the dots between your background and this topic?
Sure. So, you know, some people like to think of economics as just like the stock market and your mortgage rate and things like that. But, you know, I like to, and all my colleagues like to think of economics as much broader and things that affect human well-being. And in, you know, the last couple decades, there's been increasing recognition of the centrality of the climate for human well-being. And it seems natural for economists to try and dig into that in our kind of imperialistic approach to the world.
I'll leave that last comment unintended. As we're digging in, as was mentioned earlier, it's Earth Day today, and for the first time ever, there's actually a summit being held at the White House focused on climate. It's the Leaders Summit on Climate with 40 nations, and President Biden has made a new commitment for the U.S., raising the ambition to reduce emissions by 50% by the end of this decade. that's a very different approach than we were in for the last 4 years, and even a different one than we were in before that. I'd love your perspective on what it means to have this kind of a commitment happening today.
Yeah, I think it's a total game changer, and it's a reflection of a couple things. One, there's clearly dissatisfaction with the approach during the Trump administration, but I think it also reflects we're seeing climate change. Climate change is not something for 2050 anymore. Climate change has moved into our house. You know, California now I think has fires all year round. They don't have a fire season anymore. And we're seeing more intense storms and all kinds of weird weather, and it can be easily connected to climate change. So it's here. That's one. Two, some of the political barriers to addressing climate change seem to kind of be evaporating, or melting is maybe the way to say it. And then three, and this is maybe, and this might be why some of the barriers are starting to evaporate, is there have been, and I'll talk about this in a minute, like totally unprecedented and unpredictable reductions in the cost of energy that doesn't involve the release of CO2. And so that doesn't cause climate change. And so what looked like an enormously high hurdle maybe 10 or 15 years ago is still a big hurdle, but it's much more manageable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a different perspective now, and we see public opinion trending that way too, in terms of accepting and looking forward. But to ground us, I know you've got a few slides you can share, and I'd love it if you would give us a bit more of a foundation, especially when we think about sources of carbon and the global energy picture.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So one thing that I think is really important when thinking about climate change is not to think about climate change in isolation, but to see it as part of the global energy challenge. And I see the global energy challenge as a challenge that all societies have to face. It involves the need to balance three goals. One is how to have access to inexpensive and reliable sources of energy that facilitate economic growth. Two, how to avoid disruptive climate change, since the energy sources that tend to be the least expensive are the fossil fuels that cause climate change. And three, how to avoid the local environmental problems associated with the same fossil fuels that we have relied on for so long. So let's go to the next slide. So this is just to level set what we kind of have coming in the next several decades. On the left, you have just to give a sense of the disparity and inequality in electricity consumption around the planet. You know, in the United States, the average person consumes about 13,000 kilowatt hours per year. In China, it's 4,000 or 5,000. In India, which is home to 1.4 billion people, it's about 1,000. And in the state of Bihar, which is in India, you know, it's like 200. It's like 50 times greater in the United States than there. And so it should not be surprising then that there's going to be large increases in energy consumption in the coming decades that are all going to be concentrated in the second graph in the today's emerging countries. And so we should just take as a fact, we're not going to stop having energy demand. It's coming and it's growing, and that's going to be very important for improving living standards. So the next slide. I mentioned this a second ago. A very nice thing that was not predictable a decade ago has been the dramatic reductions in the cost of the components of low carbon energy. On the left, you have the reduction in the cost of wind and the reduction of solar. And on the right, you have reductions in the cost of lithium-ion battery packs, which are critical for driving down the cost of electric vehicles. So these reductions have made confronting climate change much more feasible than it looked 5 or 10 years ago. Next slide. But the fundamental challenge is that fossil fuels remain less expensive in most parts of the world. And on the left side, I won't go into great detail, this is in the power sector in the United States. It's still less expensive to use natural gas or an old coal plant than it is to use the renewables. And in transportation, there's been great improvements in the price of electric vehicles, but they still remain, the lifetime costs still remain larger than for internal combustion engine ones. And we have a ways to go before we'll be at break even. So the point is that the way we construct energy markets that don't account for what economists call externalities, that is the climate damages or the pollution damages, markets are pushing us to continue to use fossil fuels. And that's not just true here in the United States, but that's true globally. Next slide. And here's just I think this is a really important graph for, on the left for giving, and on the right for giving a sense of both what the scale of the challenge is and why it's especially difficult. So on the left, you have what would have to happen to global CO2 emissions year by year from beginning in 1980 all the way to the end of the century to stick to about 2 degrees Celsius increase, which is something that the scientists recommend. And there you can see the black line is where we are, and then you can see these different pathways for sticking to 2 degrees. And it's just going to require very dramatic reductions in CO2 emissions. And then if you switch over to the right side, what's striking is almost, like the vast majority of emissions in the rest of the century are going to come from today's developing countries, which isn't surprising given their relatively low incomes. And so effectively, we're going to have reductions, not just in rich countries like the United States, but very large reductions in today's developing countries. And that's kind of at the heart of what I think of as a global energy challenge, which is that you got to find a way that this looks feasible to the very countries who are most desperate for more energy consumption. Next slide. So that was kind of like the global setup. I want to talk today for just a couple minutes now about the fact that there are many people and organizations, and Carney was announced that they're carbon free, that feel like they need to personally do something to fight climate change. And that's why I started something called Climate Vault, which is a 501c3, a nonprofit. And I'll just talk to you about it here for a minute if we go to the next slide. And the starting point for it, which is that there's just this incredible increase in demand. And this is the obligatory Greta picture, but incredible increase in demand from consumers and employees that the organizations they interact with are sustainable in some sense. And that's also seen in investments with the 400% increase in investor assets in ESG sustainable indices funds in the last 3 years. And go to the next slide. But how people and organizations are supposed to make choices that are sustainable or carbon neutral is really confusing. I think that confusion and opacity about how to do it has driven a lot of people to the sidelines. It used to be that Expedia allowed you to offset the carbon emissions on your flight, but then it turned out there were scandals that they weren't really delivering the promised reductions. And so that's all kind of why I started Climate Vault, because I thought it doesn't have to be confusing. There's actually an easy button available, and that has all the features we'd like. It's inexpensive, it's transparent, and it relies on markets. And so if we go to the next slide. So I launched Climate Vault. It's founded at the University of Chicago. It's a nonprofit dedicated to carbon reduction and innovations in carbon removal technology. If we go to the next slide, the centerpiece of it is a 2-step process where an organization comes to Climate Vault and says, we would like to reduce, or a family or individual, my children and I are all carbon free now. We want to reduce our carbon footprint. And then people can make a donation to Climate Vault. And then what Climate Vault does with that money is it goes, and it's a tax-preferred donation, into the existing cap and trade markets for CO2. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with cap and trade markets, the way they work is the jurisdiction set an absolute limit on how much carbon can be released in a given year. And then say anyone who wants to pollute, you have to hold a permit to do that. And the only issue as many permits is the absolute limit. And then they enforce that very severely. If you don't have a permit at the end of the year, you're totally screwed. And so what we do is we go into those markets and purchase permits on behalf of the people who've made donations to Climate Vault. And that has the advantage that you can have great confidence that there was actually a reduction in carbon because this is a highly functioning market, and the authorities require that if you're going to pollute, you have to have a permit, but if you've taken one out, then there's one less ton that will be polluted in that market. And the second is you don't have to be an expert on where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck for your dollar in terms of carbon reductions. That's the whole purpose of the market. The market will give you back for $100, it'll give you back the largest reduction in CO2 that is possible, at least inside that jurisdiction. And we're currently doing that by purchasing permits in the North American markets, which are indicated on this slide. If we go to the next slide. And then the second step of what we do is try to foster innovation in carbon removal. And basically all climate plans have at their center that these magical technologies will appear out of nowhere and they will start sucking carbon out of the atmosphere. And as an economist, my view is, that's very unlikely if there's not going to be a market for that. If people aren't going to get paid to do that carbon removal, how in the world is that ever going to happen? It sounds like kind of unicorns and rainbows. And so as part of this, we're setting up a market, the first large-scale market for carbon removal, where we will be providing an incentive for firms to come forward, and we will purchase their carbon removal services from them. And I can talk now's not the time for it, but I can talk in greater detail about how that works. And if we go to the next slide, we've put together an absolute star-studded team to make sure that the carbon removal, I'm an economist, so no one should really trust what I say about carbon removal technology. We put together an absolute star-studded team to verify that the carbon removal is actually taking place. Former U.S. Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz is chairing it. We have Sally Benson from Stanford, John Deutsch from MIT, Kathy Witecki, who's probably the world's leading expert on advanced terrestrial carbon removal, Steve Pacala from Princeton, and Margaret Leinen, who's probably the world's expert on using oceans for storing carbon. If we go to the next slide. So to put a fine point on it, the kinds of things that the Climate Vault can do is help individuals or organizations reduce their carbon footprint. It'd be done at about a cost of $12.50 a metric ton. A second thing that we've been working a lot on is helping people neutralize the climate impacts of their investments or portfolios. That ends up costing about 3 to 10 basis points. And then some firms have begun to offer to their employees benefits of making themselves carbon neutral, and that can be done at about $200 per employee per year. And if we go to the last slide, just to summarize, I think what is Climate Vault can offer is it's fast and it's easy. You can know that there'll be carbon reduction right away. It's a nonprofit. You get high return on terms of carbon reduction for the dollar. It's credible because of the government verification, and then you can feel confident that you're spurring innovation in carbon dioxide removal technologies. So that's kind of a little update, Karen, on what I've been doing with Climate Vault, and happy to talk in any direction you want to go.
Awesome. Let's jump in. And also, just a reminder for everyone watching that if you have questions, if you use the question mark on your browser, we can try to grab them and integrate them into this discussion. But Michael, thank you for grounding us and giving us a few charts both on the massive expected growth in energy needs globally and the pathways as we think about economics, always looking at economics in terms of where markets are heading in terms of energy costs. But really, what do we do about the carbon? And thinking through, looking here at Climate Vault. So I'd love to dig in a little bit on the solution that you're building here. You're talking about using government regulated compliance markets. So very specific markets that exist. Can you help us understand a little bit more about them and why that is such an important part of how you're thinking of the solution?
Yeah, so I think it's probably useful to back up and say, well, what have people done previously? Why does Expedia no longer offer that as an option? And I think what people have done previously is try to find kind of low carbon projects that were happening elsewhere in the world, the construction of a windmill, the building of a solar plant, or planting of trees or something like that, and say, well, maybe I could pay people to do those things and count up how many tons of CO2 that's saving the world and match that with my own CO2 emissions, and that's a way to kind of offset my own emissions. What has happened, and that's been going on since probably the mid-90s. What has happened is that, you know, every 6 months there's a new scandal or expose indicating that the promised carbon reductions from those projects aren't actually taking place. And that's because maybe the project was going to happen anyway, or the trees got chopped down after the money was transferred, or whatever it is. It just keeps not working. And I think, you know, if you step outside of it, it's not very surprising. Like, the nature of the transaction is one that doesn't instill a lot of confidence. It's Karen, who is a good person and wants to do her carbon footprint, you know, buys these carbon offsets. She effectively is hiring a third-party company who's taking some of the money off the top and probably being paid by the offset company as well to verify that it actually happened. The offset company is thrilled to get the money. Maybe they were going to do the project anyways. And it's like a transaction where everybody is happy. Karen's happy, the third-party provider's happy, the offset company is happy. But there's like one group that's not at the table, and that group is the planet. And there's nobody looking out for the planet's interest in that transaction. And the consequence of that is that the desired reductions in CO2 don't take place. And so the alternative that Climate Vault is putting forward is, those are super complicated transactions. Like, why not just find the easy button here, using the Office Depot commercial? And like, the easy button is, governments across North America have set up cap and trade markets that are enforced. You have to hold a permit to pollute, and just free ride on those and take out some permits and have great confidence that there has actually been a reduction in emissions in that jurisdiction.
Yeah, let's dig in there, because I think often you'll hear in the media there isn't a price on carbon, but there are actual markets across the US where there truly is a price on carbon. Can you tell us a little bit more about where those are? So where are these existing well-structured markets that the Karens of the world should actually be looking at?
Yeah, California has one. They have a very robust one. It's actually linked to Quebec. And so you could think of them almost as one market that covers Quebec and California. And then 10 New England states have banded together. They're called it's RGGI, but the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And I think Pennsylvania is joining, so it'll be 11. And the defining feature is that they've set an absolute limit on the total amount of CO2, and that limit is lower than would happen without regulation.
So let's build from there. We have markets in the US, defined, well-structured, reliable. You're looking there, but then you've added this other piece, which is you're adding this element that's looking at carbon removal technologies. That's not a part of these markets. Can you help us understand that piece and that panel of experts you shared, how they're going to help us make sure that happens?
Yeah, sure, of course. So why did we add that second piece? It's adds a little complication. I think the reason is ultimately those markets are only so big, the California and the RGGI and the Quebec ones, and there was just this like kind of belief, which I mentioned a minute ago, that carbon removal innovation is just going to happen. It's miraculous. And these technologies are going to come out of the atmosphere, come out of the sky, and they're going to save us. And they're probably especially important that we have them, because when you look at that data I was showing you about where global emissions are going, the idea that we're going to convince India to greatly reduce carbon emissions seems a little far-fetched to me. They're very, very focused on getting more energy consumption today, and and China too, and that's largely coming from fossil fuels. So we're going to have some way to deal with emissions from those countries and some way to deal with historic emissions. And my view is, like, it's so passive to wait for those technologies to just emerge. And we know from setting after setting, the way to get innovation is to let people make money in this space. And so the second part of what we do is we say, you know, we are willing to make trades of those permits that we purchased on behalf of Karen for genuine carbon removal. We basically take them out of the vault and we'll trade them for genuine carbon removal. And the idea is that that should stimulate innovation and all kinds of learning by doing in the carbon removal space. And you know, if I can come back to it, like we have Karen who likes to travel. We also know Karen has a secret side business building a carbon removal machine in her garage, and undoubtedly the engineering of it is terrific and amazing. And I feel like I can see this. I know that you've gone to all the venture capitalists and they've said, wow, the tech is really cool. You know, who are you going to sell to? And then you have to look at your shoes and you kind of have to walk out and go back to your garage. And we're trying to solve that problem. We're trying to solve the problem that without customers, you know, you can't really have innovation. And so that's what the second part of what we're doing. And we put together this like total rock star team. When former Secretary Moniz and I were talking about this, we put together, said, okay, who are the 5 people, you know, given, you know, we want to cover all the intellectual space of carbon removal that we would like to have. And we came up with like archetypes. And we said, okay, well, person number 1 and, you know, advanced terrestrials, this person number 2 would be that, and 3. And so we had a whole thing. In each category, we're going to ask number 1 person, and then if that person turned us down, we would go to number 2, number 3. And amazingly, we got the number 1 person in each category. They all signed up right away.
So you were talking a little bit about some of these areas. So you and the former secretary are talking about these critical areas so that I can get my innovation out of the garage, because I actually need someone to buy it with my carbon removal. Often you see prizes, that's the way we're going to spark innovation. And you're talking about trying to build a sustained market.
Yeah.
Talk about all of the areas that your experts are in. Can you share a little bit more about where are these areas where you see real potential to truly remove carbon?
So I think that's a great question. I think just from reading popular press, one's mind is drawn to the direct air capture machine, like kind of like a Star Trek machine that sucks the CO2 out of the atmosphere. That is not probably a technology that we're well equipped to get lots of movement on, because it's so expensive. But there are some other technologies. So mineralization, where you use the CO2 and you bring it down and turn it into rocks and things like that. That is one that is within, according to Secretary Moniz, is within reach of the prices that prevail in these cap and trade markets. Another one is possibly using oceans. And then a third one where I think that is that some of the advanced terrestrial, so that think of like the plants with the roots, the super roots that are able to suck up more CO2 than a normal plant. And you wouldn't choose to grow that plant without a price bonus because it's more expensive, but that's what we are trying to fill in. But the truth is, like, you know, I can describe them at about this level, but if you push much deeper, I'm going to start talking about the Chicago White Sox.
Speaking for a city that has both the White Sox and the Cubs, we'll keep you out of that category. As you're thinking about this, and as you're looking at the ways different people can participate or different organizations can participate, you mentioned in some of the solutions that Climate Vault is anticipating the opportunity for people in the financial sector. You actually listed cost and basis points. Can you talk a little bit here about what this looks like if someone's in the financial space and they're trying to anticipate the ways that they can look at the solutions here?
Yeah, so there's probably plenty of people in the financial industry on this Zoom or on this webinar. But so far be it from me to talk too authoritatively about this, but doing some violence to what ESG is, I think a lot most ESG boils down to either exclusion or downweighting strategies. So that is like, I just don't want to have Exxon in my portfolio, or I want to give Exxon a lower weight in my portfolio than if I own the S&P 500 straight up. And that can be done in sophisticated ways to reduce tracking error and things like that. But at the end of the day, what ESG almost always boils down to is this kind of downweighting or exclusion. And if you, I think that's totally fine. And then Karen, investor, your third personality, can feel fine. She can feel great. I don't own Exxon. I feel good about that in terms of the planet, in terms of climate change. I think the gaping hole in that logic, and really gaping hole, is that somehow something good has happened for the planet. And I would argue basically nothing has happened for the planet. And let me explain why. Fine, Karen got rid of her 1,000 shares of Exxon, but someone else purchased those shares of Exxon. And it is certainly possible that there's enough Karen and other people in the world that you could raise the cost of capital for Exxon in some kind of over some long time horizon that would discipline Exxon in some way. But that's windy. It's like a triple bank shot and pull. And I think the idea that can be connected to reductions in carbon today, which is what the planet cares about. The planet doesn't care about anything else. I think that is, that's a pretty thin read. And so what we have devised at Climate Vault is an alternative. And that alternative is own whatever you want. We don't care. Then we're going to help you figure out what the pro rata carbon emissions are associated with your portfolio. You own 2% of GM, you're going to get 2% of GM's emissions assigned to you. You own, 3% of Microsoft, you get 3% of Microsoft's emissions assigned to you. We tally all that up and we say, well, these are the tons that your portfolio is responsible for. And then we work with investors to undo that by going into these cap and trade markets. And so the idea is that you're expressing the laudable goal of reducing the carbon footprint of your portfolio. You can actually do that in a way that's not just of your portfolio, but of the planet, carbon emissions at the planet level. And then the prices I was indicating are not it turns out, I was surprised, not that high. You can do the S&P 500 for about 7 basis points. And the NASDAQ 100, which is obviously much more tech heavy and fewer industrial companies, you can do it for 1 or 2 basis points. And so, that's, some people are going to find that expensive, but there's going to be a lot of people who want to express their interest in helping the planet. And this is a way to do that I think passes what I consider the acid test. Does the planet care? Because global emissions would have declined as a consequence.
When you talk about pricing, in part of the introduction to our session, we talked about the work that you've done on the social cost of carbon. And I'd love your perspective on the price that Climate Vault will pay versus the actual price that carbon is causing in terms of impact on the economy. How do those connect now?
Yeah, so let's go in pieces here. The social cost of carbon is a measure of what the damages are associated with the release of an additional ton of CO2. The average American is responsible for about 17 tons of CO2 a year. So what damages is that imposing on the planet? And the social cost of carbon is a measure of that. When I was in the Obama administration, it was my idea, and then Cass Sunstein and I co-led a process to set that number for the US government. The Biden administration has currently set that number at $51 a ton. They're doing a longer term review, and I expect that they will end up with probably a substantially larger number when they release the revised number in January. So suppose it were $100 a ton, that would mean that the average American is doing about $1,700 of damages to the world every single year through their release of about 17 tons. Now that $50 a ton, I'm jumping around numbers. Let's use the current US government number of $51 a ton. That's substantially higher than the cost of abating a ton through Climate Vault. And through Climate Vault, it's approximately $12.50. And so what that means is that you, Karen, we'll come back to you, I keep using you, can have confidence that you have, for $12.50, produced $51 of benefits for the world. And so it's kind of a, a quantifiable measure. So if you were the average American and you undid your whole carbon footprint, you'd for the cost of whatever it was, about $200, you would be producing about $850 of benefits for the world.
Your background in economics finally made my background as an MBA happy when we got to that last part. The math was working in my favor. So thank you. My carbon removal machine in the garage doesn't yet have legs, but this math works pretty well.
Yeah.
How do you scale that up? What thoughts do you have then for business leaders across the Chicago metro area as they're looking at climate and what they can do?
I think there is a chance for people, as I said, my kids and organizations, to really step forward and say, yeah, I got it. There's a lot of demand from my employees. There's a lot of demand from my customers. And maybe even I feel like I should be doing something about the climate. And here is like a demonstrable way to do that relies heavily on markets and produces very large benefits for the benefits that are far exceed what the costs are to families or organizations. And I guess I should mention, we're going to publicly launch next week, and there'll be some interesting announcements. There's several universities, including the first research university to go totally carbon neutral. There'll be very high-profile companies that have announced that they are using Climate Vault to go carbon neutral, and I think, but we're in very early days, and I think there's opportunities for other leaders to step forward. It's a new idea, and it requires people who have some vision and boldness. And honestly, one problem is like trusting in markets. In the environmental space, there is not a lot of trusting in markets, and I think the kinds of people who have been willing, who have signed up, have faith in markets' ability to solve many social problems.
When you think about that pathway, your big decisions being made, Chicago's a city that likes to have that angle, making big decisions that matter. What do you see that's unique about this place as you're looking forward in these bigger solutions?
This place being Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one thing that's kind of cool is there's I was born and raised in Chicago, so it is true there are two baseball teams, but in my mind there's a minor league team on the north side and the real team on the south side where I live, there is, what I have found is our internal refrain is, yeah, but does the planet care? And most of the things, the nonprofits or profits, options that are available to people to act on their desire or their organization's desire to do something or contribute to lessening the climate crisis, I think really fail that acid test of, yeah, but does the planet care? And one thing that, like, I don't know, people in Chicago are kind of commonsensible, and they're like, well, why would I do something if to help climate change if the planet doesn't care? And so that's been a refreshing part of talking to people in Chicago. That is not, like trying to break through the thicket of the usual way of doing things, and some other places have been a little bit more complicated.
So you think about that practical lens, and you think about this this home base you have on the south side, but also at a university.
Yeah.
When you look at training and education, particularly of some of our younger colleagues, what are the skills that are needed for people to come out of the gate and be equipped to address climate change?
So sorry, you're thinking of like how can students contribute to climate change, or yeah.
Yeah, how should people think about their skills, particularly as they're starting their work lives?
Yeah, I think the climate problem, and I'm worried I'm just going to be a broken record here, so I apologize about that. But the climate problem, lots of things get glommed onto it. You know, I'm going to solve energy efficiency and climate change, and both of them are totally important, laudable goals. I think like bringing a laser focus to the climate problem is really the nature and the urgency of the problem demand it. And so really, really looking for like, yeah, that's great, but tell me in tons, because tons of CO2 is the only thing that the planet cares about. And I think stripping it down to that, and I just, lots of other topics get attached to climate change. And when you have many goals, it becomes very complicated to achieve any one of them. And so the climate problem at some level is just not complicated. It's like, gotta get rid of the CO2. CO2 is the enemy. And getting people focused on that. It's something I talk about at dinner with my kids, you know, because they're getting all this information at school. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with composting. You know, does the planet really care that we compost our coffee grounds? Probably not. Same thing with recycling, same thing with several other things, like, and like that is time and energy and resources that could go to solving CO2 or reducing CO2. And so, you know, I guess when Bill Clinton ran for president in the 90s, there was that famous phrase, it's the economy stupid. You know, I think like it's the CO2 stupid, like, and that's what we got to bring to solve the problem.
I remember when we would look at the numbers for the city of Chicago, the best accounting that we had at that time, the #1 source of carbon emissions from a city like Chicago, it's heating, cooling, and operating buildings. It goes back to that electricity. It's heating, cooling, and operating buildings.
Yeah.
And then the second largest source is transportation. And so if you're looking at that question of where's the carbon, for most organizations, the headquarters, at least in Chicago, that first piece of carbon comes from buildings.
Yeah.
So as you're looking at this, and you're looking at that laser focus on carbon, the backdrop for some of this is about policy. I mean, as we said at the top, you know, the White House right now is convening world leaders. The backdrop there will be policy. In your mind, then, what does good policy look like?
Yeah. So I think that's an important point. So everything I'm talking about with Climate Vault is an adder to either an absence of policy or an adder to good policy. And I think probably the need, if the world had great climate policy, the need for Climate Vault would, you know, evaporate, I think. So I think what would constitute good policy? Maybe that's your question. I think there too, it's actually much simpler than it seems. There's two really big problems. One is the CO2 emissions, and we know the best way to handle that. That's to put a price on the CO2 emissions. You can do that through a cap and trade. You can do that through a carbon tax, and that is just about guaranteed to get you the largest reduction in CO2 per dollar spent. The second problem is that we're going to need all kinds of innovation in new technologies. And, you know, I'm not as smart as you. And so I'm like going to try and, I have my own secret carbon dioxide removal technology. And I'm going to probably try and steal some of your ideas to make my machine a little bit better. And so that spillover of ideas you know, you should be the world should be, you shouldn't have to just give it to me for free. And so there should be some funding for basic research in carbon removal. Otherwise, you know, you won't do as much as you would, because you'll end up knowing that I'm going to end up stealing some of your ideas, and you won't be able to benefit from as much. So there's a very strong case for backing new technologies in their early stages, when there's kind of generic information that could benefit multiple firms or industries. So those are the two problems. And I think it's pretty straightforward on the blackboard, not politically, on the blackboard to solve those problems. You put a price on carbon and you spend a ton on R&D. Easy, huh?
Very easy. That easy button you promised us early. I see it coming through here.
Yeah.
So as we're looking for the pathways to find all these easy buttons, and we're looking at the variety of organizations that have ambition around climate and are looking for practicalities, they're looking for pathways. You've talked a lot here about this emerging opportunity with Climate Vault to be laser focused on carbon. What else should organizations do? So if they emit, you're saying this is a pathway, what else should they be thinking about?
Yeah, so you know, I bet you and I have slightly different views on this. I think we don't disagree on much, but I bet we have slightly different views on this. My view is that organizations should be, there's one view, everyone's got to clean up their own yard. And then once they do that, they can start thinking about other things. And so then, you know, I should make my building as efficient as possible. And only then should I be worrying about other stuff. I don't actually have that view. My view is organizations who are interested in doing something about climate should look for the cheapest tons wherever they are. And if they happen to be, because they can install an energy efficient boiler in their building, or, you know, whatever it is, terrific, let's do it. And surely they will find some things to do there. But once it becomes more expensive than using the existing markets, I'm not in favor, you know, I would not recommend that. I would recommend then at that point, turning the Climate Vault or using it, you know, doing it some other way, using the markets, because again, what the planet's going to want is the biggest bang for the buck. And so why spend $100 a ton abating when you could spend $12.50 abating? I don't, you know, to me, it doesn't add up. But I think, I suspect you and I have slightly different views on this.
I suspect we're aligned on a lot. And I suspect that one of the alternate ways of looking at this one is that question of essentially engagement of individuals and the questions of seeing solutions firsthand. And I think sometimes those can be valued differently as people are looking at pathways forward. Certainly when they're looking at employee engagement and where people work and how they experience their workplace as examples.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, but the macro idea of find the cheapest ton. Globally, we've got to do a lot of finding the cheapest ton if we're going to achieve these ambitious goals that the US is announcing today, that other countries are either affirming or re-announcing or changing a little bit of today. So this cheapest ton is going to matter tremendously, and the scale question is going to matter tremendously. So when you take us back to the way you framed this on the global energy challenge, and you look at the role of a climate vault, can you get that big that fast? Does someone else need to do a climate vault in another country? How do we get big?
Look, climate vault. Yeah, that's a great question. Let me try and come at a couple different ways. So climate vault, because of the carbon rule part, can actually scale quite large. But do I think climate vault can solve the climate problem by itself? No. I think the first best way to really address the climate crisis is through robust policy globally. And you know, you got to have India inside the tent. You got to have China inside the tent. I think that is a big challenge. So that's kind of answer one. Let me try to do answer two here for a second. And I think this is something that, I talk to my friends that doesn't always, sometimes people just feel like overwhelmed by the climate challenge. And like, too hard. It's too big. India, China, Bangladesh, Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't, too much. I'm going to focus on the White Sox winning the pennant this year and definitely the World Series on top of it. I disagree. I understand that, but I think that is not the right way to think about it. The reason is, I don't think of like the climate problem as a binary problem. Like, should we have climate change or not? Like, too late. We got climate change. That's gone. But I kind of think of it as a marginal problem. We now have to decide how much climate change we're going to have. And this is returning back to the social cost of carbon. Like, this is where every ton matters. Every ton that we can abate or prevent from being emitted is going to produce, whatever the value of the social cost of carbon is, be it $51 currently, or if it ends up being more than 100. And those are real benefits. Those are people being able to lead longer and healthier lives. Those are not having, sea level rise where we're going to lead to have to make decisions about, like, on the, like, we're headed on the current path. There's going to be political decisions made about which parts of the Atlantic coastline should we let go. Like, we're going to spend every dollar protecting Manhattan, but after that, like, there's going to be very, very painful decisions about, like, not so sure about that stretch there. At the margin, those things can really be reduced. Those problems can be reduced. And so it's not just like $51. It's like, those are people's lives and our children's lives. And I think the point I'm trying to make is, like, thinking of it in a binary way, should we have climate change or not, can be kind of depressing and lead to inaction. And I think there's lots of opportunities for feeling good about making demonstrable benefits or improvements in the well-being of people around the world by taking action today, even knowing that India and China are probably still going to emit a lot.
I think this cervical focus on the ton of carbon, it is the door opener. I've had many conversations, and it's one of the few topics where an action can not just impact tomorrow, it can impact decades from now, and it can not just impact your neighbors here in Chicago, it can impact countries around the world.
Yeah.
So a ton is a ton, no matter where it's emitted.
Yeah.
So it opens up the door. As you're building on that, and you think about those many, many tons, what makes you most hopeful right now?
I think that, look, it is windy, but at the end of the day, I think we kind of get the governments and policies we demand, not just here, but around the world. You even see in China, which is in a authoritarian country, that there's responsiveness. There can be responsiveness to political demands. And I think what makes me most optimistic is there has been no point since climate change arrived, several decades ago, I think, where there has been such a high level of demand for action in the United States, in Europe, and in other parts of the world. And so I think that makes me the most hopeful. I think number two would be these technical improvements in low carbon energy sources. That the joke, you probably used to tell this joke. The joke about solar used to be solar is going to be cost competitive on the grid in 5 years, and that was always true. But that's no longer, it's no longer a joke. It's like solar's becoming cost competitive. It's amazing. So that's maybe number two. But I'm curious, what makes you most optimistic here?
So what makes me most optimistic when I think about this is the importance that populations around the world are putting on climate, because that makes it a political priority. And when it's a political priority, we can get the backdrop of policy that is solid, but we can also get the backdrop of some stability that this will be a priority, which unlocks all of the innovation, and it unlocks people's creativity in their careers and in the choices that they have to make. So the fact that climate change is here now has made it very real, but it's also opened the doors for the solutions that have to happen at the scale that's possible now.
Yeah.
So Michael, I'll ask you one last question. What do you hope the audience takes from today?
I hope, I guess a couple things, maybe learned a little bit about climate change and the global energy challenge, but two, an easy button for expressing their desire to contribute to reducing the damages from climate change. And that's what Climate Vault offers. It sounds awfully commercial, but we are we're a nonprofit. So, I've been paid $0.00 of salary. So, and I think that will be hold for the foreseeable future. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Michael and Karen, for that great conversation. I really enjoyed that discussion. And I really loved actually that last point about this not being a binary topic. I think another way that I think about that is that there's no longer really a question of if we should be taking action on this topic, but rather how, and how to do it in an optimal way from a financial and a social perspective. And just by way of introduction, my name is Michael Torrance. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at BMO Financial Group. Today is, of course, Earth Day, and it's also a day where we saw major policy announcements from the Leaders Summit on climate, all in pursuit of a net zero carbon emissions future. And BMO Financial Group is committed to leadership on climate action, and to do so by being our client's lead partner towards a net zero world. And we made a recent net zero commitment, and as part of that, we established a BMO Climate Institute, which is designed to provide our clients with advanced thinking on climate-related goal setting and to share our thought leadership and analytical capability to drive our clients' sustainability strategies. And that's also part of a commitment to mobilize $300 billion in sustainable finance by 2025. We see this as a great imperative, and we're really all in on this, and we want to be with our clients every step of the way on this journey. And as I look back on today's program, I think the thing that really stood out to me the most was the role that markets can and must play in finding solutions, and how important it's going to be to invest strategically by companies, but also by individuals or asset managers to create meaningful change. And I think one thing is really clear to me, and has been for some time, is that as business leaders, we have to act now to make our organizations resilient and competitive, while also building a sustainable future for us and for future generations. Because I think never before has there been such a clear linkage between competitiveness and sustainability. So with that, I'll close, and I'll thank Michael and Karen again for the great conversation. And on behalf of the Executives Club, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us.